Hello and welcome back to the series Masters of the Chessboard, where we're going through the famous Richard Reti's book Masters of the Chessboard, looking at all of the games and Reti's analysis of the games one at a time. So in this video we're going to look at the second game of the book, still following Adolf Anderssen, and his opponent is the same Jakob Rosanes that we saw last year. The year is 1863, 1 year later than the last game, and it's been played in Breslau, the same place as last time, or Wrocław as it is now known. So, Anderssen has the black pieces, and Rosanes has the white pieces. Rosanes opens with e4, e5, and f4. Rosanes playing the King's Gambit, which is quite usual for the era. Anderssen accepts the gambit. Last game we had d5, the Falkbeer counter gambit. Here Anderssen accepts a challenge and takes the pawn. Rosanes responds with knight f3. Reti writes how this is the so-called King's Knight gambit. Other continuations could be bishop c4, the bishop's gambit, bishop e2, the restricted bishop's gambit, or queen f3, the Breyer gambit. But Rosanes plays the King's Knight gambit, knight f3. And here, black responds with g5. And Reti offers quite a bit of analysis at this point. He says how for many centuries now, it has been known that the only way to protect this f4 pawn is by playing g5 straight away. And he says that, as already mentioned in the first game, the main goal of chess in this era, the main thing that most players were after in Anderssen's time, was to gain material advantage, and so g5 secures this additional pawn that the black player has from move 3. It's going to be very hard for white to now capture this pawn. Now here, Reti writes that white can continue with two different options. He can continue with bishop c4 and then castles, but Reti is really quite critical of this bishop c4 move, because he says that it's very much it's based on naive tactics, and it might be used by more superficial players whose only aim is to attack at all costs, and who are not really aware that this isn't actually in accordance with the King's Gambit. He says that the main idea of the King's Gambit is to try and open this f-file and gain some counterplay down this f-file, hoping to try and benefit from these weaknesses on f6 and f5 that have been caused by black pushing this g-pawn. So, to play in accordance with the real meaning of the gambit, Reti writes that white would therefore aim to first of all seize control of this f-file and remove the pawn on f4. So therefore, instead of bishop c4, white should play h4, undermining this pawn on f4. And he says that it was no accident really that typical positional players like Steinitz and Rubinstein were of the opinion that playing h4 in the fourth it is the better variation of the King's Gambit, and it favours white now. But it does say that it should also be noted that in the fourth move that white has, this will determine the next part of the game. So bishop c4 means that white can no longer undermine this f4 pawn by playing h4. So let's have a look. If we play bishop c4, black can defend with h3. And now if we play h4 to try and undermine this, black can respond with bishop g7. And now take, exchange rooks. This f4 pawn is still defended. However, if white plays h4 straight away, now black can't defend this by playing h6, because h takes g5, h takes g5, and white wins the rook. So it's at this point that white has to make a decision as to how they're going to proceed. They proceed with bishop c4 and continue with superfluous attacks, as Reti calls it, or they can continue with h4 trying to win this f pawn and gain control of the f file. Rosanes responds with h4. So Anderssen pushes a g pawn to g4, forcing the knight to move. And Rosanes plays knight e5, the Kiesewetzky gambit. Reti does give knight g5 as another sort of common continuation, which is the Algeia gambit, and he says that this can give white a very dangerous attack, but white has to be prepared to sacrifice this knight. After black plays h6, white must take on f7 because the knight's got no other safe spots. So Rosanes plays the Kiesewetzky gambit with knight e5. Anderssen plays knight f6. And now in this position, Reti looks at white's potential moves, and he says that this position actually provides a very good opportunity of demonstrating how you can really understand an opening rather than just knowing the mere variations. He says the average player looking for obvious attacking moves would often play bishop c4 as a sixth move right now. But he says that the King's Gambit isn't really a modern opening, and therefore a lot of its variations originated at a time when positional thinking was really quite rare. The main focus was on just tactics and attacking. But if you keep in mind the underlying idea of the opening and the positional needs of the opening, you'll see that the elimination of this f pawn and opening the f file is the main goal, and therefore d4 is of primary importance, opening up the attack on the f file and securing a pawn in the center. And he says that this move was favoured by older masters such as Philidor, and has recently been demonstrated as being very advantageous for white by Rubinstein. He does say that if after d4, d3, knight d3, knight takes d4, white does lose a pawn. But his position, black's position, is far from enviable because he has the irreparable weakness of the f file, and therefore it's not really surprising that white would have the better game in this instance. But because of the era, it's not that surprising that Rosanes plays bishop c4, so creating a threat on f7. Anderssen defends this by playing d5, e takes d5, and then bishop d6. Anderssen delays capturing the d pawn, instead favouring quick development. Rosanes plays d4, protecting the knight, and then knight h5, protecting the f4 pawn. And here we can see that it's not so easy now for white to open the f file. Though Reti does write that white should have perhaps persevered with opening the f file by castling, even though after castling, black can take on h4. So we have knight h5, and Rosanes responds very similar to last game, bishop to b5 check, forcing Anderssen to play c6, allowing Rosanes to trade off his weak pawn, avoiding any loss of material, and actually gaining a very big material advantage. White is now a full rook up, but Reti does write that white, to be sure, now has the advantage of a clear rook, but on the other hand, white has a very undeveloped game and an endangered king position, which you can see, like, white's king is fully open, and just look at all these pieces in the back rank. White may be a rook up, but is white really a rook up? Well, it probably appears that no, he's not. Knight g3, attacking this rook, forcing the rook to go to h2. Reti writes that it seems almost superfluous to mention that white should have tried to sacrifice the rook on h1 by playing King F2. But Reti does write that Anderssen has shown in a very long analysis that he would still have sufficient attack after white plays King F2. So Rosanes plays Rook H2, defending a rook, Bishop A5, developing the bishop, and Bishop D5. Reti writes that Bishop C6 would have been a better move by Rosanes because it would defend this E8 square, stopping black from ever getting a piece onto it. But Rosanes plays Bishop D5 and King G7 exclamation mark, making way for the rook. Rosanes continues to develop, and then Rook E8 check, developing the rook with a tempo and a king. The king has to move, King F2, and then Queen B6. And with this move now, black threatens to bring about a decision by playing Bishop E5. So we can see if white just allows Bishop E5 by playing a bit of a non-move of Bishop E5. Now the threat of Bishop E5, again if we make a non-move, is Bishop takes D4 check. If white blocks, Bishop takes E3, King E1, Bishop F2 check, King G2, and Queen E3 mate. So after Bishop E5, the only way white will be able to defend is by playing something like Knight B5, defending this pawn. But that would just give away the knight. And even here, white can't just take back the bishop and equalize. Queen C5 check, Queen D4, Queen takes D4 check, E1, and we have a mate. So Queen B6 is threatening to end the game right now. Rosanes replies with Knight A4. So now if Anderssen plays Bishop E5, Rosanes will just take the queen. He plays Queen A6, threatening mate in 4 moves, which A3. So A3 is a bit of a non-move. So Queen E2 check, Queen takes E2, Rook takes E2 check, King G1, Rook E1, King F2, Rook F1 mate. So that's the threat of Queen A6. So Rosanes must respond to this, and he plays Knight C3. But this isn't quite enough. Anderssen still replies Bishop E5. Rosanes plays A4, and here Anderssen announced mate in 4. It's achieved by Queen F1 check, Queen takes F1, Bishop takes D4 check, Bishop defends, Rook takes E3, and now if the king goes to G1, we have Rook E1 mate. Any other move, such as E3, will be met with Rook E2 mate. So that was the game. It's game number 2, and it was another beautiful game with some really quite beautiful combinational play by Anderssen. And again, we do see the power of Anderssen's development. Like we saw after white took this rook, white just had no pieces playing. Yet Anderssen was able to develop really quite quickly. And at this point, the game was pretty much lost. Like the computer gives a minus 3.4 advantage to black. It's just lost in this position. And it's because of white's lack of development again, just like we saw in the first game. And Anderssen was able to pull off a rather beautiful mate. So that's it for the second game. The third game of the book is Anderssen's last game. It's about 10 years later, and it follows a bit more of a positional game, which Reti says that Anderssen in his later years played more and more positionally, but he never really lost his combinational genius. So I hope you will join me for the second game. And if you like this video, please do like, comment and subscribe. If you've got any suggestions or any games you want to see, please leave them in the comments and I will see what I can do. So thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time.